بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى أن رآه استغنى إن إلى ربك الرجعى
bu ñu ko nangulee yàlla nañu ko dencal foofu yàqu bi di yëg ci mbaaxub yonente bi sallallahu taala alayhi wa sallam. tey nag ki nga xamante ne moom lañu fas yéene àndal ci jotaay bi mi ngi tudd Serigne Djibril Silla Serigne Djibril Diagne moom afan xam naa tur yi kon sant wi laa xamatu moom Serigne Djibril Diagne la tudd mu bokk ci yi nga xamante ne sa seereel na ko mooy mi ngi bokk ci ñi nga xamante ne taxawaloon nañu bërëb bi ñu nekk ci ba ngi nekk ci daara yi soppay Seexul Xadim ñi koo xamante ne danay participer ci lépp loo xamante ne lu baax la. li nga xamante ne mooy Maodo bi nag Maodo li mu bëgg a waxtaane mooy ñi nga xamante ne diine lislaam lañ jàng ak arab ba noppi nag tax ñi jàng diine ak arab te jotuñoo jàng dara ci ci tubaab bi wala jàng nañ ci dara sax waaye seen njàng demewu ci noonu ba noppi nag wëlbatiku def loo xamante ne lu ñëpp mën a teg seen bët la ñu mën cee joxe exemple ku mel ne Sidi Lamine Niass rahimahullahu taala anhu ci loolu ci la bëgg a jëmale waxtaanam bu ñuy xamle aslëf ci moom dañ naan moom mi ngi gënee àdduna Dakar la gënee àdduna nee na màggee Tëngéej jàng ba am baccalauréat moom demee ba war a dem université ginnaaw bi la yàlla dogal mu ñëw fii 1919 la ñëw fii ci réew mi boobu ñëwee continué ak njàngam ak gëstoom muy koo xamante ni ku ñemee liir la te itam ko ubbeeku la macha allah ñun moom xam nañ ci dara wax dëgg yàlla ndax yàgg nañoo toog ak moom mu di ñu dolli ci lépp nag mu doon ko teey ku dal macha allah. ñu koy ñaanal yàlla rek leeral laa ñu dem te ubbi dënam ñun fii nar a wax lépp doon lañ mën a jëriñoo ci mbaaxoog yonent bi sallallahu taala alayhi wa sallam. bismillah.
asalaamaaleykum wa rahmatullah. bismillahi rahmaani rahim. wa inni a'uuzu bika wa zurriyyatahaa mina shaytaani rajiim. rabbi a'uuzu bika min hamazaati shayaatiin wa a'uuzu bika rabbi an yahduruun. Good evening, everybody. Thank you. It's going to be in English. Thank you, Senior Abdul. And thank you for the presentation. So my topic today is religious entrepreneurship and the rise of Islamic civil society in post-colonial Africa, West Africa, post-colonial West Africa. So the key words here is religious entrepreneurship, Islamic civil society, post-colonial West Africa. Post-colonial meaning after the independence of African countries. And in West Africa, why West Africa? We are more interested into West Africa in the history and the sociology of Muslim societies in West Africa. So we're going to take the case of Nigeria, which is an English-speaking country, and Senegal, which is a French-speaking country. So I'm going to use Nigeria as an example and Senegal in my presentation. So as an abstract, I would say the Islamic intellectual tradition has gained vitality in post-colonial Africa with thousands of scholars in Islamic studies trained in the Middle East and in various African countries. But these graduates of Arabic and Islamic studies programs have worked hard to extend the Islamic space of meaning in the post-colonial period. In the process, they use modern form of legal, social, and political organization, as well as media outlets such as newspaper, radio, TV, and the internet to reach the wider society, including the Europhone elites. Europhone meaning those who receive a European education, like myself. So you will hear also, I will mention a lot Arabophone. Arabophone meaning those who receive only Islamic and religious and Islamic education and Arabic studies, like Ustaz or Saint Abdul. They endeavor to undermine the dominant epistemological framework that colonialism, secular society, and westernized African elites in the 20th century have created and set as standard to access power and authority in post-colonial West Africa. So Arabic educated intellectuals in West Africa managed to topple illiterate rulers and establish Islamic states in which Arabic was the language of administration until the advent of European colonial rule at the beginning of the 20th century. During the first half of the 20th century, colonial languages gradually rose to prominence, undermining in the process the centrality of Arabic. This was the case when West African countries became independent. French, English, Portuguese had already imposed themselves as languages of administration and to some extent of business. So Islam in the post-colonial public sphere. So now with the Western educated African political elites who inherited political power and provided leadership in post-colonial quest for development, political and intellectual emancipation, view secularism, which is the separation between religion and state, as a panacea to rule their religious countries. In spite of the vitality of Islamic intellectual tradition throughout the colonial rule, its graduates have remained outside of the decision-making circles. Only a few of them were co-opted into circles of power as advisors in Arab or Islamic affairs to heads of state or diplomats. Due to a lack of adequate knowledge and degrees in European languages, voices of Arabophones were not heard in public spheres. But they did speak. Arabophones were preoccupied with issues similar than those of their European counterparts and had pursued intellectual conversation in their own ghettoized forums. As a result, two sets of debates were taking place among educated West African intellectuals. So many people have always assumed that if you did not go to a European school, you didn't receive Western education, you were not an intellectual. But at this point, when many intellectuals of Arabic education returned home, they had their own forum, but they were not visible, but they were addressing the same issues that their counterparts who received Western education were addressing, which was issues of development, political, cultural, and economic emancipation. So the Europhones, who are considered the real intellectuals, they took advantage of their control of hegemonic languages and access to media to weigh in on major issues. Pure Arabophones created their own narrow space to address a variety of issues related to nation building. There was little awareness to such endeavors by Arabic-speaking intellectuals, because very few bilingual in Arabic and Europhone languages a few bilingual actors could navigate between these two worlds and raise awareness about the complexity of the intellectual field. For example, the annals of the University de Say. University de Say is an Islamic university in Nigeria, one of the very first Islamic university here in Nigeria. The annal, they have a publication, an academic journal, which is called Annal of the University de Say. They publish in Arabic, to which faculty members of the Department of Arabic and Islamic Studies of that university were the main contributors. The then rector of the university stated that the study of Islam and Muslim societies in sub-Saharan Africa was central to the intellectual mission of the university. They have published between 2007 and 2015 over 2,500 pages of scholarly articles of a respectable academic standard, a number of which dealt with the sociology and history of Muslim societies in Africa. In contrast, another scholarly journal, Islam and Société au Sud du Sahara, a scholarly journal created by French historian Jean-Louis Triot, also published articles with themes very similar to the ones addressed by the publication of the Université Islamique de Say, but in English and French, and written by scholars from Europe, Africa, and the United States. According to Professor Usman Khan, scholars involved in each of these two journals, including those with linguistic competence in both Europhone languages and Arabic, did not know about the existence and efforts of the other, and therefore did not cite the other publication. So when Professor Usman Khan is revealing here, the gap that exists between Arabic journals publishing standard academic articles, scientific articles about sociology of Islam and history of Islam in African societies, that they don't know each other. So Jean-Louis Triot also, Islam au Sud, Société au Sud du Sahara is a very famous journal, scientific journal, published by Jean-Louis Triot. Jean-Louis Triot is also a very famous historian, but both of the contributors of each journal, they did not cite the other. They did not quote them in their publication or their research because they even don't know that of the existence of each other's journal. So that's what Professor Usman Khan found very controversial in all this debate that's going on. So in French West Africa, the official media gave voice essentially to debates in European languages, which they assumed to be intellectually sophisticated simply on the basis of the language in which it took place. They looked down Arabophones, who they believed belonged to a pre-modern world. In response to the marginalization, Arabophones attempted to resist the Europhone intellectual hegemony in different ways. Aware of the centrality of Arabic language and expertise in Islamic studies in an Islamic order, many sought through peaceful means to promote such an order. In the process, they participated in the vibrant Islamic associational life generated by the expansion of education in post-colonial West Africa. Some Arabophones strove to gain fluency in European languages, to participate fully in public debates without neglecting the Arabic language. They created their own media outlets to state their views in public debates, not just in their home country, but also in the diaspora. Like many Western educated students in France, Great Britain, or in the United States, West African Arabophone students in Arab universities created many nationality-based student societies to debate matters of concern to them, which can be overheard in the newsletters of Al-Ittihad, the Union, published by the Association of Students from Cameroon in Egypt, and South Al-Rabita, Voice of the League, by the National League of Senegalese Students in Egypt. probably Ustaz Abdul Samad probably knows this journal, South Al Rabita, which is the voice of the League. So they engage in debates similar to those of African students. I had a chance to receive an audio recording of someone who has worked at South Al Rabita just yesterday, and he was saying that they've been collecting since South Al Rabita has been created in 1988 until now. They've been trying to put together all the publications they had, and they're trying to put it up on a website so that people can go and access them for research purposes and the like. So in general, African Students Association in France or Great Britain will engage in two types of debate. On the one hand, they address the conditions of immigrants in general and students in particular in host societies. Many students enrolled in tuition-free or cost-affordable universities did not have scholarship to cover their living expenses. How to pool resources necessary to provide material to support all African students was a major preoccupation of student associations. International student associations lobbied their governments, but also they networked with larger pro-immigrant organizations, human rights groups, trade unions, charitable religious organizations, and of course leftist political parties to facilitate students' admittance and protect them from xenophobic segments of the host countries. They were also concerned with the situation of their home countries and more generally the entire African continent. They held discussions on matters related to nation building. They vehemently denounced apartheid in South Africa. They criticized widespread authoritarianism and criminalization of opposition in Africa. They spoke against neo-colonial domination, and of course they celebrated Pan-Africanist heroes such as the Ghanaian Kwame Nkrumah, the Senegalese Cheikh Anta Diop, and the Burkinabe Thomas Sankara, and South Africa's most famous prisoner and late President Nelson Mandela. Similar questions and issues were being debated by Arabophones in Cairo and elsewhere. In the opening statement of his presentation titled, "What is a Negro?" a student from Cameroon, an Arabophone student from Cameroon, cited former South African Prime Minister Pete Botha's argument that black people are inferior to whites. While condemning such a racist statement, he argues that not all African problems can be blamed on imperialism, that ruling African elites have a great share of responsibility in the persistence of problems on the continent, such as illiteracy, malnutrition, pandemics such as AIDS, malaria, cholera, and the unavailability of potable water. So in the 1992 issue of the Voice of the League, which is that the League, the publication created by the National Association of Senegalese Students in Egypt in Cairo, the newsletter of the Association of the Senegalese Students in Egypt, Mamadou Diouf, who a Senegalese graduate of business school, an Arabophone too, reflected on the causes of underdevelopment of the third world. Why are we backward and others developed? So Diouf, he said these questions preoccupies everyone, including scholars and researchers, and various answers have been provided. Some attributed underdevelopment to natural causes, others to imperialism, others to the social environment or attachment to traditions, or others to religious beliefs. Others offer a racial explanation of global inequality, arguing that the white race is superior to other colored races in intelligence, entrepreneurship, and ability to innovate. To support this claim, they stated that the population of developed countries is white, with the exception of Japan, whereas the majority of the third world is colored. The truth is that none of these theories is founded. That was Diouf making his argument there. So at the end of his article, he wrote, "I must emphasize that national development will not come from scratch. or void slogans. It makes no sense and cannot be achieved without hard work and discipline. I would like also to draw attention to the fact that we are like all educated Senegalese. There is no difference between us. People must not think that we are less capable than anybody else or that we have no role to play in the nation's building. If we have proven our determination and courage outside the country by fulfilling all requirements to obtain accredited knowledge and culture, we must prove this upon our return to our country by contributing to production and nation building. And this same controversial explanation of global patterns of inequalities are addressed in the same way by Europhone African scholars raising and dealing with these same issues today. Although they face some of the same problems as students in foreign countries, Arabophone graduates had different trajectories when they returned home. Europhones had greater recognition and stronger chances of getting jobs than Arabophones, at least when their countries' economies were booming in the 60s and 70s, which means that in the 60s and 70s, it was easier to get a job because back then African economies were booming and finding a job was easier. But it was harder for Arabophones to get one compared to their Europhone counterparts. So political parties recruited among the Europhones their top political and administrative leaders and managers of state-owned companies that promoted industrialization. The story was a bit different for Arabophone intellectuals. After graduation, Arabophones returned home to continue their struggle for recognition. But starting in the 1990s, great civil liberties were granted to citizens by most West African countries as part of political liberalization. Among them, a great variety of societal initiatives that included those promoted by activists in the field of Islam core. In Francophone countries such as Senegal, Arabophone produced magazines and journals. They created radio and TV stations. They used both Arabic, French, and African languages to reach wider audiences, including Europhone intellectuals, and promote their ideas about Islam and the centrality of the Arabic language in Muslim societies. In northern Nigeria, Arabophones produced Islamic literature in English and wrote in Hausa, in both Latin and Arabic script, to reach a rich and wide audience. Taking advantage of these developments, Arabophones in both Anglophone and Francophone countries broadened societal debates, creating their own Islamic public sphere, understand public sphere as a space separate from existing religious and political authorities, and the space for households and kings. So public sphere is where everything can be debated, every issue can be raised and debated when it relates to development, economic development, political and cultural emancipation, and the like. So the Islamic public sphere, in which Arabic and Islamic scholarship will acquire greater public visibility and exposure. So the rise of Islamic associational life. So central to the rise of Islamic civil society in post-colonial West Africa has been the expansion of modern education. So education, the expansion of education has had a lot, has impacted a lot the rise of this Islamic civil society that we're talking about. So compared to the colonial period, when education was the reserve of a privileged elite, the post-independence period witnessed mass literacy. African rulers rightly believed that the greatest development challenge was to provide education. In virtually all countries, education received the lion's share of state resources. In oil exporting countries, such as Nigeria, where the boom of the 1970s provided unexpected additional resources, the investment in modern education was the greatest. In 1976, Nigeria launched a universal primary education program that enrolled more than 9 million children, according to official sources. In addition to primary schools, the federal government and member states of the federation invested huge amounts in secondary and tertiary education. High schools, teachers' colleges, centers for vocational training, polytechnics, colleges and universities all mushroomed starting in the 1970s in Nigeria. The expansion of education created a fertile ground for students in general and Arabophones in particular to organize and promote their agenda. Students and academic staffs created various organizations that brought together people on the basis of common interests or communal belonging. Leftist and Marxist-inspired organization and Pan-Africanism dominated campus life in the 1970s, a period of intense intellectual decolonization. Beginning in the early 1980s, these groups had to compete with new religious organizations. Unlike the traditional churches and Muslim communities that dominated the religious landscape of West Africa, and to which many belonged by virtue of birth, affiliation with these new religious organizations was voluntary. The Muslim youth were more attracted by a new pattern of Islamic militancy. The Muslim Student Society of Nigeria, the MSS, created in 1944 by Yoruba Muslims attending Christian schools and striving to protect their Muslim identity, was the most prominent of such movements in West Africa. It rose to prominence with the expansion of education. It became the platform for Muslim activism in university campuses and beyond. Some of its members went to Iran, Libya, Saudi Arabia, and other countries propagating Islamic ideologies. They organized rallies to promote re-Islamization of society and to weigh in on the deliberations of constituent assemblies and entrusted with drafting the constitution of the second and subsequent republics in Nigeria from the 1970s. They even clashed with Pentecostal Christian groups that resented Muslim ethno-religious and political domination. Their clashes were even exported to larger Muslim and Christian communities. As you know, there are many clashes that happens between Muslim and Christian groups in majority Muslim countries such as Nigeria. And it happens all the time where you see Muslim and Muslims and Christian groups fighting each other. So graduating Muslim students from the Nigerian graduating Muslim students founded various professional associations, some religiously based and others based on religion and gender. One based on gender, such as the Federation of Muslim Women's Association in Nigeria. So this proliferation of religious organization in Nigeria was partly the consequence of prolonged military rule, during which political parties were banned, creating a vacuum that other organizations of civil society filled. In those associations, people could congregate, debate, and organize for political activism to influence society and the state. Graduates of Islamic and Arabic schools were also involved in creating and promoting these societies. The largest such movement in post-colonial West Africa is the Society for the Removal of Innovation and Reinstatement of Tradition, known as Yan Izala. So Yan Izala was the most prominent association, religious association, created by graduates of Islamic and Arabic studies in Nigeria. So it recruited millions of members whose worldviews and modes of organization were exported to neighboring Niger, Cameroon, Chad, and Ghana. Created by former students of Sheikh Abu Bakr Mahmoud Gumi, who passed away in 1992, the Yan Izala movement preached an abandonment of Sufi practices such as zikr, as well as the reform of many social customs, which many argued curtail aspiration for emancipation of the rising Muslim middle class. Inspired by Neo-Salafism, the Yan Izala sent members throughout the Nigerian Federation to preach. It became very popular among urban youth by building its own mosques, taking control of other mosques, and imposing its own understanding of Islam. Before the Yan Izala started to preach in Nigeria, marriages, funerals, and naming ceremonies involved a variety of religious actors and traditional actors, and it used to be fairly expensive. The Yan Izala denounced such celebration and offered to celebrate these for free. Another major contribution of the Yan Izala was the education of women. They denounced the widespread Hausa custom of secluded women and not educating married women, and instead created thousands of schools in which it offered instruction for women. Many of their ideas appeal, of course, to urban educated people, particularly students. Religious entrepreneurs who, for the most part, were products of the Islamic intellectual tradition, led Yan Izala and similar religious organizations elsewhere in West Africa. They were branded Wahhabi by their opponents, so this organization contributed greatly to disseminating Salafi worldviews in West Africa to the detriment of Sufi orders. Many of them received Islamic literature from oil-rich Muslim countries that also promoted Islamic associational life throughout the Muslim world, including in West Africa. Various international Islamic NGOs opened branches in sub-Saharan Africa to deliver development aid in the name of Islamic solidarity. This offer triggered a huge demand for Islamic entrepreneurial vocations. Many, as entrepreneurs, conceived projects and tried to sell them to benefactors from oil-rich countries. In addition to Muslim individual benefactors distributing their zakat in poor African countries to please God, there were also states in search of influence that consciously used Islamic solidarity to reach that objective. Libya, under Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi, the late Muammar Gaddafi, was one of such states. Muammar Gaddafi, he created a legion that attracted many impoverished young Muslim migrants from Africa and the Middle East in search for job opportunities in the context of drought in the 1970s. Likewise, Iran, in an attempt to export its Islamic revolution, provided financial support to Muslim activists from various African countries. The oil boom of the rivalry between various countries competing for prominence in Africa became a real blessing for Arabophone religious entrepreneurs. The great appeal of Islamic activity meant a great role for them. Many graduates from Saudi Arabia universities secured funding to establish schools, orphanages, Islamic centers, magazines, journals, and associations by which to reach larger and wider audiences in different sectors of society. In Senegal, several Islamic associations became very prominent in public life, including the Cercle d'études et de recherche sur l'Islam et le développement, which brought together many intellectuals, including scientists and doctors. New associations began to make even bigger impact on society. Organizations such as the Jamaat Ibadur Rahman or Al-Falah, which transitioned from being union-like associations in defense of Arabophones searching for social stability to larger social movements that appeal to all sectors of society, including Western educated people and the urban middle class. As measured by membership of young males and females in high schools, colleges, the civil service, and the private sector, these associations have had a great impact on society. From the 1970s to the mid-1980s, when I was attending primary and secondary school, no female schoolmate or classmate were wearing the hijab or headscarf at that time. But in the 1990s, when I was in college, already by the 1990s in Senegal, no less than 20% of young female students were wearing the Muslim headscarf as a result of the proselytizing of the Jamaatul Ibadur Rahman and Al-Falah. So these two associations, religious associations of Jamaatul Ibadur Rahman and Al-Falah, they have had a great impact in influencing young female students to wear the hijab. The numbers increased to include members of all age groups, and their impact went beyond the circles of adherents. And in imitating them, many other Islamic societies and groups started promoting the wearing of the Islamic headscarf. These groups developed their own strategies of communication using various media outlets and platforms, including radio, TV, the internet, journals, preaching tours, cassettes, Islamic summer camps, and even visits to prisons. Unlike earlier generation of Islamic leaders, such as Sufi sheikhs, who contented themselves with teaching and preaching without challenging the separation between religion and state, some Arabophones used their newly created organization as a forum to influence state policies and promote the Islamization of the state. So Islam and the media revolution. Although the liberalization of higher education created greater educational opportunities for Arabophones, the emergence of private media contributed much in the same way to giving them greater public visibility. Before privatization, colonial languages and leftist discourses dominated university campuses and the public sphere in Africa, in general and West Africa in particular, to the detriment of African languages, at the exception of Kiswahili and Hausa, in which in their Arabic transcriptions were important repositories of Islamic pre-colonial writings. As you know, Kiswahili is mainly spoken in East Africa, in Tanzania, Kenya, and the like, in those areas. But they're spoken by, it's the most widely spoken language in that area. It's spoken by over 60 million, it has over 60 million speakers. So, after colonialism, they remain widely taught in the Latin script, meaning Kiswahili and Hausa in the Latin script, and have been used for communication alongside English in some English-speaking countries. In the framework of the policy of indirect rule in northern Nigeria, policy of indirect rule of the British, of course, during colonialism, Hausa has remained important after independence as well. So even the British during colonialism, they encouraged their officers and administrators to learn, to know how to read, write, and speak Hausa in Nigeria. And but the majorities of European colonies adopted French, Portuguese, or English as their main language of communication and instruction. After decolonization, meaning after independence, African ruling elites claimed that promoting pluralism, both linguistic and political, would undermine efforts of nation building. Given that no native group could claim a colonial language as a mother tongue, and that modern schools typically offered instruction in colonial languages, therefore the latter were enthusiastically adopted as the language of administration. As such, they remained the languages for communication in the official media until the liberalization of the media. When the private media established itself strongly enough in Senegal, they provided live coverage of the elections results, not just in French but also in African languages. Yet, greater than its political effects was the impact of the liberalization of the media on society and religion. So the liberalization of of media, when private entrepreneurs opened their TVs or radio station first and TV stations, it has had a greater impact on those religious entrepreneurs and Arabophone entrepreneurs. So in the 1980s, the majority of West Africa did not have a command of European language. However, most broadcast media transmitted mainly in European languages. A notable exception was the BBC services with its Hausa program, listened by an audience of 6 million people in West Africa, with an elaborate vocabulary which was developed by the broadcast company, BBC. They developed an elaborate vocabulary of Hausa, which to report international affairs to its audience, to the listeners of BBC in its Hausa programming. There were nothing similar in the Francophone world. As the liberalization of media was unfolding, there was a sense in French-speaking West Africa of the necessity to rethink communication strategies and give greater attention to the African languages in order to reach and to educate larger sections of the population. In the 2000s, greater progress has been achieved to decolonize communication. So there was this process of decolonizing communication that was spearheaded by Arabophones, but it accelerated and peaked in the 2000s, and until today you can witness how that has grown to be a mammoth in the media and the communication networks. In Senegal, private media are now devoting much more broadcast time to African languages. Although written media are essentially in French, all news broadcast on TV and radio stations is offered in French and in Wolof, the lingua franca. Interviewees in French are also asked to summarize the content of their answers in Wolof for the Wolof edition in the news. Several important debates are held in Wolof and other national languages such as Pular, Serer, Jola, and Mandinka that are given also broadcast time through radio and TV programs. Given their greater facility with national languages, Arabophones are typically sought out to help develop adequate language to communicate economic, political, and social issues to non-Western educated people. One of the leading Senegalese media network at the time of liberalization is the Walfadjri Group, founded by late Sid Lamine Niasse, may his soul rest in peace, who belonged to a prominent Muslim clerical family of Senegal, the Niassène Tijaniya. Graduate of a traditional Quranic school, he subsequently attended Al-Azhar University in Egypt. Upon his return to Senegal, he created a monthly Islamic magazine in 1984. It was called Al-Quds, which means Al-Quds. Let me take it. Quds. Holy. The Holy, Al-Quds. That was the name of the journal of the late Sid Lamine Niasse. So, name Walfadjri, the magazine was his magazine, the journal we're talking about. It was very eschatological in its editorial content, as it was critical of aggressive secularism inspired by the French philosophy of rule. 3 decades later, his enterprise has grown to become one of the leading media groups in West Africa, publishing newspapers but also running a radio and a TV station with thorough national and coverage and a great variety of programs in French, Arabic, and national languages. Through internet and linkage to various satellites, its television station Wolf TV now has global reach. Of its many programs, the one entitled Diine ak Jamono meaning religion and contemporary issues, has the largest national audience. Presented in Wolof, it brings various actors from political, economic, and cultural life to address timely issues. There is no issue of national or international importance that has not been debated on the program since it was established in the mid-90s. Above all, the program has been centered on the debate of ethics of good governance, and consequently has contributed considerably to giving greater political awareness to the population including those without knowledge of the European languages. Sidi Lamine and the Wolf Group are one of the many important actors of the civil society to have established themselves in the Senegalese public sphere. Several other Islamic groups in Senegal have created various forums to impact public life. For instance, the Mustarshideen movement, led by a Senegalese sheikh initially trained in Arabic. He was a serious threat to the rule of former President Abdou Diouf. In addition to supporting various development projects at the grassroots level, they have organized a Ramadan University annually. So annually, that Ramadan University, which is inspired by similar programs organized by political parties to educate their members and develop strategies of recruiting and retaining members, it invited prominent national scholars, often university professors, to share their knowledge with the larger public. The Ramadan University was held in Wolof and simultaneously translated in English, French, and Arabic for a large and diverse audience. Academics who were confined in their university ivory towers and have exclusively lectured in French have, through the Ramadan lectures, taken up the challenge of explaining complex notions in Wolof to larger audiences. To bridge the gap between the academic and wider public audiences, several religious groups have created their own TV stations offering a large variety of religious education programming. Because these groups are above all committed to spreading their own worldviews, they are making a major contribution to the dissemination of writings in Arabic and Ajami. For example, two Senegalese Murid-owned TVs, such as Lamp Fall, also Lamp FM TV and a radio and a radio station, and Touba TV, they devote significant broadcasting time to the work of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. Some Murid NGOs, such as Mazhabul Fawzaini and Hizbut Tarqiyyah, has undertaken the translation of the writing of Ahmadou Bamba's prolific intellectual production in European languages, most notably in French. Some Murid TV stations, like Al Muridiyya of Hizbut Tarqiyyah, are broadcasting these writings via the internet to the national and international diasporic audiences. They broadcast to the diaspora everywhere in the world where you have now the internet. With the internet, you can connect to all TVs around the world. Another program that has created a particular strong awareness of this intellectual tradition is called Talifu Makni. Talifu Makni meaning the writing of the ancients. Broadcasts devote particular attention to religious songs also, the Hasaids, as you know, written by Senegalese Sufi sheikhs. These songs provide us with research material for the study of the worldviews of the Muslim people of West Africa. They can help document aspects of the biographies of the authors as well as the context in which these biographies are produced. So the emergence of new media has provided fertile ground for the diversification also of the musical offerings. Several new repertoire are being introduced by new bands created by urban youth in Muslim areas such as Senegal and northern Nigeria, where Islamic songs in Arabic and African languages such as Hausa and Wolof are now in the majority. Not long ago, with the exception of some Qadiri groups that beat the drums to accompany their singing of religious songs during their religious festivals, the use of musical instruments was atypical in Islamic religious singing in West Africa. Sacred music and profane music were considered separate repertoires. Muslims would listen to the singing of religious songs in religious functions and settings, and to profane music in songs at home and in nightclubs. But the two were never mixed. They were never mixed, and the singing of religious songs were rarely accompanied by the use of musical instruments. But popular singers in Senegal occasionally devoted a song or an album to the praise of religious saints using modern musical instruments, but their music was essentially considered profane. Now many musical bands using different genres, from rap music to mbalax and all types of musical instruments, are singing poems written by African Sufi sheikhs, praising the Prophet or other saints in Arabic or African languages. In this way, they are disseminating knowledge of the Islamic archive. As a conclusion, I would say that the creation of TV channels have increased demand for Islamic programming, and in the same way, the emergence of modern Islamic public sphere, which has had two effects on Arabophone entrepreneurs and their contribution to nation building and development in West African majority Muslim countries such as Nigeria and Senegal. On the one hand, it bridged the gap between them and the Europhone intellectuals. Large segment of the membership of Islamic organizations created or led by Arabophones are Western educated now. This provided some Arabophones with great social recognition. So the fact that Arabophones now are able to have in their among their members, Western educated people and the like, has given them more public, more recognition and visibility. So you will see, intellectually trained and professional Africans, West Africans in Senegal, Nigeria, and anywhere where you have in Muslim majority countries who are joining now membership of religious organizations. So that also gives more credit and visibility to this organization run by Arabophones. So, and TV and the media and radio and TV has played a major role into giving that visibility to Arabophone entrepreneurs. So as a result, they have become more moderate. So which means that also, while you have many Arabophones who have been who had immoderate discourse or speech in their writings, in publications, or when they were speaking to in public, by frequenting these Europhone intellectuals, some of them have moderated their speech and moderated also their worldview. But other Arabophones have remained intransigent in their demand of de-Westernizations by building alliances with like-minded groups and continue to question secularism in public debates and in their writings, and in due course to take arms against the state. So this is the end of my presentation, and it ends with the note that among the Arabophones, like I was saying, you have some who have moderated their speech and discourse in public debates, but others have remained intransigent, and they have been even making alliances with like-minded groups, and sometimes they take up arms. The example that most of you knows is Boko Haram in Nigeria, who is still today fighting against the Nigerian government, Nigerian state. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any question or if you need to pursue the conversation, you have the floor. Thank you. ma wax tuuti ci wolof, ma tënk tuuti ci wolof. waaw ma tënk tuuti ci wolof. Jërë ngeen jëf, merci beaucoup. ñu ngi seetaan tam ci internet bi, ci Facebook bi. tey ñu ngi doon waxtaan ci li nga xam ni mooy maanaam ñi nga xam ne dañoo jàng arab, jàng ci école arabe, jàng mu kawe sax, te it ñu jàng diine. ci ñooñu laa doon waxtaan ak maanaam seen participation ci li ñuy wax société civile xam ngeen ko mooy ñi nga xam ne dañuy lëkkaloo def ay kuréel ak ay mbootaay di waxtaan ci li nga xam ne mooy jëm ci li jëmale seen réew kanam. donc sujet bi loolu la woon maanaam ñooñu nga xam ne nag ñu ngi jàng ci école arabe yi ci université arabe yi ci bitim réew fu dul Sénégal xam ngeen ko muy Maroc, Algérie ak Libye wala Soudan wala Arabie Saoudite wala Koweït ak Maroc ñooñu ñëpp lañ doon wax ñoom seen ni mu jafe woon ci ñoom ñu am liggéey suñu jàngee ba ñibbisi par rapport ak ñi nga xam ni que ñoom njàngum tubaab sama classe bi nga xam ni ñun daaw ñu am problème pour am liggéey ci njëlbeen li nga xam loolu nag dañ ko tàmbale waxtaan bi maanaam ci li ñuy wax l'Afrique postcoloniale maanaam bi Afrique